There was a time when humanity stood as the undisputed master of the stars. Across the galaxy, human banners flew over countless worlds. Vast arcologies pierced the skies, and machines of impossible scale worked tirelessly for the prosperity of mankind. It was a golden age of progress, a dream where every frontier opened, and no Xenos, no god, no demon could rival the sheer will of humanity. But golden ages never last. Beneath the shining veneer of advancement, cracks spread. Warp storms swelled across the galaxy like black scars, cutting off entire systems. Ships that once crossed the stars in weeks vanished without a trace, swallowed by the tides of the Imperium. Entire civilizations, once bound together, were suddenly stranded and alone. Isolation bred madness. Worlds that had thrived on unity collapsed into chaos. Without trade or communication, famine followed. Without order, war ignited. Neighbors became enemies, cities became fortresses, and countless planets descended into centuries of bloodshed. Humanity had ruled the stars as one empire. Now it tore itself apart in 1,000 tiny, savage wars. And the warp itself had grown cruel. Among humanity, psykers began to appear in numbers never seen before. At first they were heralded as gifted, even divine, until their powers slipped beyond control. One by one they became gateways for horrors beyond comprehension. Demons spilled forth into reality, feasting on souls, burning worlds to ash. Families were slaughtered by the hands of their own children, their minds twisted by whispers that no mortal could resist. This was not a war fought against aliens or ancient machines. It was something worse, humanity itself becoming the executioner of its own species. Whole sectors drowned in fratricide and corruption. Ancient achievements rotted, libraries burned, technology was lost forever. In some places, desperate survivors devolved into cannibal tribes, worshipping dead machines as gods. The promise of mankind's future had become a nightmare. What had once been the greatest civilization in the galaxy was now reduced to fragments, broken, blind, and screaming in the dark. Billions upon billions perished. Countless worlds fell silent, their lights extinguished, never to shine again. And still, the horror deepened, for the warp storms did not fade. They raged on, smothering hope, severing every attempt at unity. The galaxy became a graveyard of humanity's ambition. This was the darkest night in human history, the brink of extinction, not by alien conquest, but by mankind's own hand. To the scattered survivors, it felt like the end of everything. To historians, it would be remembered as the Age of Strife. But for those who lived it, there was no name. There was only hunger, madness, and endless war. It was the day humanity almost died. In the ruins of once proud civilizations, monstrosities wearing human faces rose to power. Isolated planets became arenas of despair, where petty warlords carved empires out of starving millions. Some worlds fell under the rule of tyrants who declared themselves gods, feasting on their subjects' fear. Others devolved into kingdoms of cannibals, where the last remnants of humanity survived by devouring their own. Technology, once a tool of progress, was reduced to superstition. Machines worshipped as idols, their purpose long forgotten. Across the galaxy, the stories were the same. On one world, towers of bone rose higher than the mountains, built from the corpses of the fallen. On another, mutant kings ruled with iron claws, their thrones surrounded by screaming sacrifices. For countless generations, humanity knew nothing but war, starvation, and nightmares without end. Entire cultures collapsed into savagery, while others became slave states ruled by psykers whose minds were little more than open wounds to the warp. The warp itself mocked mankind. Every day new psykers were born, and with them fresh conduits for demonic horror. Cities burned in crimson light as screaming hosts of the Imperium tore into reality, unleashed by the uncontrolled minds of terrified mortals. Families were butchered in their homes, empires undone in a single night of possession and slaughter. Humanity had created its own predators, and they were indistinguishable from neighbors, friends, or kin. And yet, scattered amidst this abyss, fragments of hope remained. On Terra, the cradle of mankind, there still walked a figure who had endured since the dawn of human history, the one we now call the Emperor. As the galaxy writhed in torment, he prepared. Patiently, silently, he gathered knowledge, armies, and the strength to forge a weapon against the nightmare that consumed his species. But before his banners could be raised, the galaxy had to fall further still. The Age of Strife dragged on for millennia, grinding humanity down to the bone. Each century erased more knowledge, more unity, more life. It seemed inevitable that mankind would vanish entirely, consumed by its own weakness. To billions of lost souls, there would be no salvation, only the endless night. Yet from this abyss, destiny took form. Out of the ashes of cannibal kingdoms and demon-haunted cities, the Emperor would eventually march. He would call forth the thunder of the Great Crusade, uniting the shattered remnants of humanity under a single, merciless banner. But in those dark millennia before his rise, humanity truly stood on the edge of annihilation. This was not merely a dark age, it was the apocalypse of a species, the day humanity almost died, and perhaps the day it deserved to. On Holy Terra itself, cradle of mankind, the nightmare was at its most vivid. The world that had once been the jewel of human civilization had become a wasteland of blood and fire. Towering hive cities stood like rotten carcasses, their spires blackened by endless war. Beneath them, billions clawed for survival in oceans of filth and ruin. Entire continents had been reduced to battlefields where techno-barbarian warlords waged eternal war, each claiming to be the rightful heir of humanity's throne. Their armies were cobbled together from gene-spliced monstrosities, vat-born mutants, and desperate slaves armed with scavenged relics of lost technology. Cannibal cults thrived in the underhives, their altars dripping with the flesh of the weak. Savage tribes worshipped shattered machines, burning incense to dead reactors as though they were gods. Some warlords ruled through fear and steel, others through heresy and the promise of false salvation. For centuries, Terra was nothing more than a graveyard of progress, an endless slaughterhouse where hope itself was a forgotten relic. And yet, through this maelstrom, a single figure walked unseen. The Emperor of mankind had lived for thousands of years, hidden in plain sight, shaping history from the shadows. But now, amidst humanity's lowest point, he began to act openly. No longer content to merely observe, he forged alliances in secret, gathering warriors, scientists, and knowledge torn from the ruins of past ages. Slowly, inexorably, he prepared to strike. When he finally revealed himself, it was not as a gentle savior, but as a conqueror. His war against the techno-barbarian tyrants of Terra was brutal, merciless, and absolute. With armies of gene-forged soldiers and weapons long forgotten by lesser men, he tore down the false kings one by one. Empires built on slavery and horror were reduced to ash, Pretenders who had ruled for generations were crushed in days. To the countless billions who cowered in fear, he appeared not as a man, but as an unstoppable god. The unification of Terra was drenched in blood. Cities were burned to the ground, their populations enslaved or exterminated. Cults were annihilated, their sacred relics shattered, their names erased. It was said that the rivers of Terra ran red for years as the Emperor carved order from chaos. But from this savagery, the first glimmer of unity was born. Terra was no longer a battlefield of petty lords. It had become the seat of a new, merciless empire. This was the true end of humanity's near extinction. The Age of Strife had driven mankind to the brink, but in that abyss, the Emperor rose. To some he was salvation. To others, he was simply the greatest tyrant ever to walk the earth. Yet one truth could not be denied. From the ruins of despair, he had forged a weapon that would shake the stars. The nightmare of old night was ending, and a far greater nightmare was about to begin. Stand with the Imperium, subscribe, give your like, and let this channel grow stronger. Your support is the lifeblood of this crusade, and without it, even the Emperor's light may fade.